piece I've chosen to analyze for this paper is the third movement of Bach's Second Sonata in A minor for solo violin, the Grave. This book of 3 partitas and 3 sonatas is something that as violinists we play often. I study at least a movement every single semester, and this is the movement that I'm studying right now. The sonata in A minor has 4 movements: Grave, Fugue, Andante, and Allegro. And the Grave and the Fugue are very intense and sort of ambiguous rhythmically. The Grave is very slow, very minor, sort of sad, and the Fugue is just all over the place because it's a fugue. And then the Andante stands out to me because it's not grave, so it's not super slow, but it's calming down after the fugue, and it's in the key of C major at the beginning and the end, and so we get a breath of fresh air from all of this minor stuff, and not only is it in C major, but it's also very the rhythms are very clear and clean. It's 8th notes and 16th notes and 32nd notes. It's not an improvisatory grave with all kinds of rubato, and it's just very clear. The meter is 3/4 and the form is binary. The A section is shorter than the B section, so I usually perform this with the repeat of the A section, but I often leave out the B section. I like to do at least the first repeat so that I can play around with contrasting phrasing, or maybe as a performer give me a chance to hit some things that I might have missed the first time around. Challenges in this piece are keeping the 8th note steady, because it's for solo violin, and Bach wrote this to sound like 2 violins playing. There's a lot going on in the left hand, and so oftentimes my attention gets pulled away from my right hand, and then I'm not so consistent with that 8th note pulse. The phrase lengths in this piece are also very interesting. It's the meter is 3/4, but the phrases are like 3.5 measures long. So I think that the first phrase ends on the second beat of measure 4 at a half cadence. We start in C major, so you see a single or a double stopped G, and that's 5 of C, and then there's a PAC on the downbeat of measure 8. So before that you see this big 4-note chord, which is the max you can get on violin is 4 notes at a time. This big 5/7 and landing on C major. And then we go on. I think that's like the main phrase, and then Bach sort of expands and like cadences again, almost, I feel like. After measure 7, it's just more tonicizing G, and then eventually cadencing, tonicizes G and then cadences on G, and leaves us with a big old 5 at the end of the A section. So this first section, the A section, I have a narrative, I have some imagery. I start it sort of soft mezzo piano because it's so calm, but I'm a soloist, so there's nothing else happening. I still have to be heard, but if I could start at pianissimo and that makes sense, I would. So I just start at a calm demeanor. When I was trying to figure out what imagery I wanted to have, I wanted to decide what the most prominent feature of the piece was. And I decided that that is the eighth note pulse. And what this calmness reminded me of was ripples in a still lake. Especially because the eighth notes aren't sustained. When you're looking at it on the page, you might think that I would hold them out super long, but they're really just, when you can see in my performance, I just sort of touch the string to get the sound and then move on to the melody notes. I was trying to come up with a narrative and keep this lake theme in mind, and I developed this character. I imagine a young man who's come across this lake after dropping a woman off on their first date, and he's just enthralled, and he's so like peaceful and happy, and he comes across this lake and he sits down and he's just thinking about how tender and lovely the woman is, because the C major section is just so serene. And then in the B section, the character sort of experiences some doubt, but looking at the A section still, there's some moments that really stand out to me, being measure 7, those 4-note chords is just like very joyous, very full. I like to play those out. And then another moment that stands out is the second beat of measure 9, that eighth note pulse stops, and it's like his heart stops beating for a measure. I thought that was cool. Moving on to the B section, you still have these weird 3.5 measure phrases, but they're parallel. However, they're in a minor key. So we'd start with a G and a D. And it's kind of hard to analyze this harmonically. Sometimes it's sort of ambiguous because it's not like chords stacked on each other. Like the chords are like part of the melody notes, and it's sort of weird, but I tried my best. So we start with this G and this D, and it sort of feels like it's missing something. When the phrase started the first time in the A section, we had a C and an E, and that's a major third, but the G and the D is a fourth. So yeah, so it's missing something. It's like what key are we in now? We don't have that clarity at the beginning of the phrase, and then Bach goes on in measure 13 with a G sharp, and you're like, oh, we're back in minor. We're tonicizing A minor again. So that with our character, that made me think that he's reflecting on his past, that grave and that fugue movement, and maybe he's thinking about past failed love, or like maybe he's doubting himself, or he's fearful, and that G sharp is really like that past like creeping back in, and it's like, well, here we go again. Bach's gonna get emotional. Then we have that G sharp E B. It looks like an E major chord, so it makes sense for it to go to an A minor chord in measure 14. And we see another E major chord in measure 15, and that is the half cadence that ends that first phrase, and it's parallel to the one in the A section. It's a little more notes. It's a little thick, just a little bit thicker. You see 3 voices in there sometimes, when you didn't see that until maybe the voicing is parallel, but the 3 voices happens in a little bit of a different spot, not a huge detail. Then in measure 15, we see sort of a shift from that. In the beginning, in the A section, we had kind of the same intensity throughout. Like, there's little phrasing things that you can do, but in measure 15, there's really a big shift from this full sound to this really timid sound. I need to charge my camera and start again. I'll snip it together. So, we shift to this really, like, timid, high part of the register, thin sounding material in measure 15 and 16. And I think that's more of an intimate, internal reflection of himself, whereas before maybe he was thinking about other people. It sort of sounds more outward, and this is really personal. Like, maybe he's like, how could I be good enough to be with this woman? Self-doubt. We'll go with that. And then it sort of maybe those fears of self-doubt and those past relationships, those past bad experiences just come together and culminate in measure 17 with this D sharp fully diminished 7 chord, and it's that C sharp in the upper register is the highest note that we play in the whole piece, and it's happens 2/3 through the piece, so you would sort of expect a climax, and Bach gives it to us. And that D sharp fully diminished 7 chord resolves to E minor in measure 18. Just like, okay, so we're still sad, but we're like a different kind of sad. So you see an E minor chord, that G sharp goes away in measure 18, and then you start to see, F sharps and cadences in E in measure 19. So the phrasing is a little if this was totally parallel to the A section, this is sort of where it would end. That's about the same length as the A section as measure 19, but Bach goes on. Can't just leave our character sad on a lake. We go in, we carry on in E a little bit. We see B flat and C sharp, so there's some weird harmonic stuff going on. And then eventually we tonicize G major again in measure 22. That whole measure with the F sharp is, I'd like to take that measure slowly because we're finally out of this minor sadness. We're starting to feel hope again. Our character's like, maybe this time is different. And then that landing point on measure 23 is just a huge, like, exhale. And then we see A flat and E flat in measure 24, and I honestly don't know what to make of that. I think it's just a salient event. We haven't seen flats throughout the whole piece, so maybe it's like just us modulating back into C major, because we see that that A flat is an F minor 7 chord that goes to a cadential 6/4 C chord, then resolves to G, and then we're back in C major. And so our character has found some hope at the end of all of this. Good for him. Dynamics that I play throughout this, what I generally try to follow is the thicker parts being more notes. I play out, and the thinner parts I play less, and I think that sort of reflects that within a character, external fear, or external emotion towards someone else, versus internal reflection of yourself. Going back to that imagery, just going back to the beginning a little, the A section, those big 4 chords on the 3rd beat of measure 7, that's like he just thinks she's so beautiful, and then because it's thick, I imagine him thinking about her, and then when the heartbeat stops in measure 9, that 30-second note run is like just him feeling happy with himself. He's feeling content. And then you sort of see the opposite end of that in the B section, and then he comes back to a big old C major at the end.